Well, thank you for your testimony, Mr. Sopko, and I'll now recognize members for 5 minutes each. Um, and pursuant to House rules, all time yielded is for the purposes of questioning our witnesses. Because of the virtual format of this hearing, I'll now recognize members by committee seniority, alternating between majority and the minority. And I can only call on you if you're present with your video on. If you miss your turn, please let our staff know and we'll circle back to you. If you seek recognition, you must unmute your microphone and address the chair verbally. And I'll start by recognizing myself for the first question. One common thread across SIGAR's work is how the Department of Defense, given Reconstruction responsibilities that it was ill-suited for that task because uh, because it had the resources to do it, but the State Department and USAID may have been able to do those things better. I asked you about this issue when you last testified in front of the committee in January of last year, and one of the takeaways was to increase staffing and presence of diplomats in the field. But much of this is the product of how Washington decisions are made. The Biden administration has given the USAID administrator a seat on the National Security Council, which is a first. And this can balance some of the discussions at the interagency and is a welcome recognition of the role development can play in advancing our national security. Can you speak to how the DoD was able to crowd out state or USAID in Afghanistan? And what more can be done to ensure that critical voices are not left out of the conversation when discussing these issues?
DOD didn't crowd them out for nefarious reasons. It was just, I think, the reality of the situation. Their funding overwhelmed state and aid. They also had the capability to get into areas that were not safe. And that's another problem you have to realize. You know, some State Department and aid officials jokingly said we were out PowerPointed. You talk about some of the meetings and organizations that were set up in which there was supposed to be equal membership from state, aid, and DOD, and maybe there'd be one person from aid and one person from state and 20 people from DOD. That is a particular problem. It's enhanced in Afghanistan because we wanted fast results, quick results. And I think there was a frustration expressed by DOD that state and aid and regular development, and we all know, and you particularly in the committee should realize that development takes time. You can't do development or reconstruction in months or even half a year or a year. It takes time. And what happened is DOD was given the reins to do a lot of the development aid and didn't know how to do it, didn't have the capability, didn't have the expertise. And that's particularly a problem. It's a problem basically of funding. We tend to view more bodies in state and aid as a waste of money, but we don't if we're talking about the Defense Department. And I think until we get over that and realize state and aid have important missions, they have to be fully funded.
All right, no, thank you. In your most recent report, you note that contractors were often used to travel to places that were deemed too dangerous for U.S. government employees. This made the U.S. government dependent on contractors to do oversight of projects, which meant there was little to no actual oversight over the projects. This problem of U.S. personnel being stuck in embassies and unable to get into the field is, of course, not unique to Afghanistan. But as we explore doing development in other conflict zones, how can the United States ensure that diplomatic and development personnel are able to get out into the field in the same way that contractors are?
I think Congress, the ultimate thing is Congress, the American people, and the administration, whoever's in the White House, Democrat or Republican, has to realize that diplomacy is never going to be totally risk-free. We expect and we understand when DOD takes calculated risks. There has been a tendency, and I saw this over time in Afghanistan, a fear among State Department officials and aid officials to take risk. As a result, people didn't leave the compounds, people didn't go over the wire and do work they need to do. And I think it's because they were afraid they would get in trouble if somebody got hurt. I'm not talking about recklessness. I'm talking about there are State Department, if you talk to the average State Department official or aid official, they understand they have to take risks. You have to let them take those calculated risks. Then we don't have to worry about contractors doing their job or worry about DOD doing the job. I think it's the approach we have to risk taking in the diplomatic field. We have to resolve that.
No, well, thank you, sir. And I want to pass it over to the ranking member for her questions.
No, thank you very much. I appreciate